In my last video, I explained what the 30 Days Wild Challenge is, so I won't go into too much detail here. But in short, it is an initiative by the UK's wildlife trusts to encourage people to spend more time in and connect to nature. I'm doing this by exploring the natural world in different areas and conducting a leisurely survey of the species I noticed there. My last adventure took me through a mini safari in my own back garden, but not everyone is lucky enough to have a garden, so for my next adventure, I needed somewhere that more people would have access to. I chose a local churchyard. Burial grounds such as graveyards, cemeteries, and churchyards can be found all over, from villages to towns and cities. Despite being a place of death and mourning for us humans, these spaces often act as a hub of wildlife, though this will vary by location, nearby green spaces, and how the site is maintained. Hi, I'm Dr. Eleanor Tufnell, an environmental scientist. Come with me as I explore the habitat created by the churchyard. I'll tell you all about the different species I identified, with some fun tangents about the history and significance of a selection of them. Mammals. This will be a fairly short section, as I only saw 2 mammals, not counting humans, during my visit, and both are the result of human activity. The first was the European rabbit. What does that have to do with human action, you might ask? Well, rabbits are not originally native to the British Isles, and it is believed that they were instead introduced by the Normans. That said, there have been rabbit bones found at the Fishbourne Roman Palace in West Sussex, dated to the 1st century AD. But these are believed to be the bones of a pet rabbit, rather than one that ran wild. An excavation of a Roman settlement in Linford, Norfolk, found the remains of a rabbit which had been butchered. However, it is unknown whether this was a wild-caught rabbit, or one that had been brought over as livestock and kept in a cage. Aside from this, Norman settlers did bring rabbits to Britain for meat and fur, and are currently believed to be the origin of our current rabbit population. We do not know precisely when this introduction took place, but around the 12th century we start seeing references in the literature. The internet tells me that the first mention of rabbit warrens can be dated to 1176 on the Scilly Isles. But to my frustration, I have yet to identify the source of this information, so take it with a grain of salt. I should also note that native is a tad complicated here because it's used to mean species that arrived since the last ice age without human assistance, because rabbits were present in pre-glacial Britain. They just do not appear to have recolonised the islands after the ice receded. But back to the bunnies in the churchyard. I saw many rabbits, their warrens and their latrines. I also had the privilege of seeing a mother rabbit and her babies, kits, foraging close to the entrance of their warren. Probably one of the many entrances to that warren. Rabbits have multiple places to run. This includes small burrows and bolt holes, which are usually quite shallow and short. These are designed as emergency hidey holes in case of danger. However, the permanent, well-established warren is the result of many generations of colony rabbits. How deep warrens go depends on soil type and water level, but in soft, sandy soil, warrens can reach nearly 2 metres, that's 6 foot, deep, and contain over 100 entrances and hundreds of metres of tunnels. If you're wondering how that works out in something like a churchyard and whether they excavate things we'd prefer they didn't, yes, this is a thing that can happen. Burrowing creatures such as rabbits, badgers and moles are known to periodically play archaeologist and bring up bones or burial goods from grave sites. While a tad morbid, this can be extremely useful when surveying an archaeological site, as examining the discarded dirt from animal excavations can reveal some interesting information about the site's previous uses. The other mammal I saw in the churchyard was a dog. Thankfully, his human was a responsible dog owner, and thus I do not need to go on another dog-themed rant. But the presence of dog walking highlights an important point about many burial sites. They're usually open to the public and allow people to walk through them. This may be one of the more accessible locations if you want to explore nature a little. Birds. During my time in the churchyard, I heard 12 different birds. I should note that the Merlin App identified 2 additional birds, but I do not believe they were actually present. It thought it heard the firecrest, but as these are quite rare birds and are not known to be found in the area, the app doubted this identification. Weirder was its identification of a grey heron, which wouldn't be weird except that I was inside the church at that point and it was utterly quiet. Unless there was a colony of herons hiding in the vestry, I'm going to chalk this up to a mistake on the part of the app. The birds I'm reasonably confident I actually heard were the wood pigeon, Eurasian blackbird, Eurasian wren, Eurasian magpie, European robin, Eurasian blackcap, dunnock, rook, red kite, Eurasian collared dove, greenfinch, and Eurasian jackdaw. Of these, I only saw the wood pigeon and the blackbird. Aside from the greenfinch and the red kite, I heard all of these birds in my garden adventure, so I shall focus on the 2 new birds. The greenfinch are small, around 28 grams, and commonly found in gardens, parks, farmland, and woodland. Their beak is stout and chunky, which helps them crunch seeds, though they also eat fruits and invertebrates. Males can be distinguished by their grey-green head and greenish body. The females are a more muted brown. The tails and primary wing feathers of both are edged with yellow. If you watched my video on whether or not we should feed birds, you'll know that greenfinches are at particular risk of trichomoniasis, and their numbers are now around 70% lower than they were in 1967. Please see my video on the topic to learn best practices for bird feeding to keep these lovely birds safe. The red kite also faced its own challenges. Believed to be a threat to game birds and pets, the red kite was hunted to extinction in England and Scotland in the 1800s. Luckily, a small population survived in Wales. Reintroduction programs in the 1980s and 1990s were stunningly successful, and today the red kite can be found across large stretches of the British Isles. Though they still face persecution, particularly in Scotland, the revival can still be counted as one of the greatest conservation success stories. These magnificent birds of prey are some of the easier ones to identify. Aside from their rusty red-brown body, not a surprise that the red kite is red, and angled wings, the most distinctive feature is their deeply forked tail. The heads are pale grey with dark streaks, their beak is yellow with a dark hood, and their eyes are pale and striking. The top sides of their wings have darker tips and edges, while the undersides feature a large block of white before the dark, fingered wing tips. Despite the fears that these birds would target game birds and pets, they are predominantly scavengers, eating mostly carrion, including roadkill. It will still sometimes catch live prey, usually very small creatures like mice, foals, and small birds. When I was a kid, these birds were still quite rare, so hearing its call while in the churchyard was a wonderful reminder of how successful conservation efforts can be. Insects. I saw 2 species of insect of note in the churchyard. When I first saw this bumblebee, I initially mistook it for a white-tailed bumblebee, but upon closer inspection of my photos, I think I was mistaken. White-tailed bumblebees feature 2 yellow stripes, one high up on the thorax and one on the abdomen. But look here. This bumblebee has only 1 stripe on its thorax. The rest of the thorax and abdomen were mostly black, but it has white hairs along the tail end of its abdomen, and some slightly orange hairs near the tip. I'm pretty sure this is one of the cuckoo bumblebees, based on the single yellow stripe across the top of its thorax. I'm ruling out the southern and gypsy cuckoo bumblebees, as it lacks the yellow patches on either side of the white tail. It's not a field cuckoo bumblebee because its tail is white rather than yellow. Barbot's bumblebee is ruled out as they have 2 stripes on the thorax, which, by process of elimination, leads me to the forest cuckoo bumblebee. I think its abdomen curls under, which is a distinguishing feature for me and females, but I couldn't be certain from my photos. As the name cuckoo suggests, these bumblebees have a different reproductive strategy to their peers. Instead of making their own nests, they infiltrate the nests of their host species. In the case of our forest cuckoo, these are early heath and bilberry bumblebees, and lay their eggs in their nests. Because of this strategy, cuckoo bumblebees do not need a queen or workers, and thus only feature male and female casts. Females also tend to emerge from hibernation later than other bumblebees, so that they can take advantage of already established nests. As they don't need to feed their young, having left them for other bees to raise, females do not have pollen baskets on the back legs, though do still eat pollen themselves. Forest cuckoo is rarely found in Ireland, but is fairly common throughout the rest of the British Isles, provided its host species is present. As the name suggests, they prefer woodland, but are also seen in gardens and parks. They have a short tongue, so prefer open flowers to feed on. This includes thistles, dead nettles, buttercups, and, in the picture I took, green alkanet. The second insect I saw was far too quick for me to snap a photo. This was the holly blue, a lovely little butterfly, with some real ups and downs. These butterflies are, as the name suggests, a light silvery blue colour. Their upper wings feature a black border, which is much thicker and more noticeable in females. It can be distinguished from other blue butterflies, first by size, as it is much smaller than the very rare large blue, and much larger than the tiny small blue. It can be distinguished from the remaining blue butterflies by the black speckles on the otherwise silver undersides of its wings, as other blues feature orange spots. If you're seeing a blue butterfly in early spring, odds are it was a holly blue, as they emerge earlier than other blue butterflies. They also tend to fly high, dancing around bushes and trees, while other more grassland-focused blues prefer to stay near the ground. They typically raise 2 generations of butterflies in a year, the caterpillars of each generation having different food plants. The spring generation predominantly feed on holly, hence holly blue, while the summer generation feeds primarily off ivy. As the churchyard I visited featured both holly and ivy, the butterflies have ample food for their caterpillars, which are small, green, and sometimes have small areas of light pink. Holly blues are the subject of parasitation by a species of parasitic wasp, which lays its eggs in the holly blue caterpillars, killing them in the process. As a result, holly blue populations fluctuate year to year, with some years seeing fewer holly blues, leading to fewer parasitic wasps, which in turn leads to the holly blue populations recovering, and the cycle begins again. Plants. Oh, I could be here all day with the plants I found. Honourable mention should go to the lichens, mosses and fungi I also encountered. If you're looking for any of these, a burial ground is an excellent site for them. Lichens in particular often benefit from stones that are left undisturbed for a long time, which is precisely why they do so well on gravestones. But onto the plant species that stood out to me while I explored. I'll arbitrarily divide them into trees and smaller plants for convenience. The trees I spotted included the linden, yew, both Irish and common, holly, beech, rowan, sycamore, plane tree, hawthorn, ornamental cherry, and a number of ornamental non-native trees I have yet to identify conclusively. The smaller plants I found included forget-me-nots, daisies, ground ivy, Germander speedwell, self-heal, white dead nettle, cinquefoil, green alkanet, dog violets, a fern of undeterminate species, creeping toadflax, white bryony, pelletry of the wall, and lady's mantle. We'd be here all day if I discussed all of these in this video, so for now I shall pick one tree and one smaller plant to tell you about in more detail. Let's look at the yew tree. If you're searching for ancient yew trees in Britain, the vast majority can be found in churchyards, as their location has offered some protection from land development and timber harvesting. A yew is not considered ancient until it reaches 800 or 900 years old. Some of the yew trees planted in churchyards may be older than the church itself. Yews that predate their churches may have been planted alongside now long-gone churches, or as part of a pre-Christian sacred site that was later adopted by Christian tradition as the site of a church. The oldest living tree in Britain is believed to possibly be the Fortingall yew in Perthshire, which is thought to be between 2,000 and 3,000 years old, though outside and somewhat less reliable estimates put it as old as 5,000 years. Many yews were planted at the same time as their accompanying church was consecrated, and these are known as consecrated yews. It is not certain why yews were planted alongside churchyards, though there are a few theories, including that yew trees were planted over the graves of plague victims to purify the dead, or that churchyards planted them to stop commoners grazing livestock in the churchyard, as yew seeds, leaves, and other parts of the tree are toxic to most mammals. The ancient yew group argues that consecrated yews should be treated as artefacts of historical significance, on a par with the original church building. Precisely dating yews is a complicated procedure, primarily because old yew trees become hollow, thus removing the oldest part of the tree, which would be used in radiocarbon or dendrochronological dating methods. Old yews can be categorized as notable, over 300 years, veteran, 500 years plus, and ancient. A good rule of thumb is if the girth exceeds or has exceeded in the past 5 metres, the tree is likely to be a veteran, while a girth exceeding 7 metres suggests an ancient yew. So how to identify a yew? Well, this churchyard had 2 distinct variants, the common yew and the Irish yew. The Irish yew is a mutated form of the common yew and was first found in Northern Ireland in the 1700s. One of the original 2 specimens still exists and thrives to this day, and it can be found in the grounds of Florence Court Domain in Northern Ireland. All other Irish yews are clones of the original specimens. How to tell them apart? Well, common yews tend to grow much taller, potentially 20 metres in height, and tend to have a more sprawling build. Irish yews are usually much shorter and grows to about 7 metres and have a distinct column shape. This smaller, neater shape makes it a popular choice for topiaries and hedges over the much larger and more unruly common yew. The needle leaves of common yew grow in 2 rows along each twig, and the needles are dark green above with a more grey-green colour underneath. The needles of the Irish yew grow all around the twig, and the needles are a darker green than the common yew. The yew is an example of a plant that is dioecious, which means that the male and female flowers grow in different trees. As the original Irish yew tree, from which all others were propagated, was female, all Irish yews are female. What happens if you plant the seed of an Irish yew? You get a common yew tree. Male flowers are generally small, white-yellow, round structures, while the female flowers are more bud-like and scaly, starting out green then turning brown with age. While yews are conifers, they do not produce seeds within a cone. Their seeds are instead inside berry-like structures called arils, which are fleshy, red, and open at the tip. The seeds are highly poisonous to most mammals. Although some, such as squirrels and dormice, do consume the arils, it is unclear whether they are resistant to the toxin or are simply avoiding eating the seed. Certain species of bird, including the blackbird I saw in the churchyard, eat the berries, and the toxic seeds pass through their digestive system undigested. In addition to the food provided by the tree, due to the yew's dense branches, particularly as a hedge, it provides good shelter and nesting opportunities for a number of birds, including goldcrests and firecrests. The leaves of the yew tree are food plants for the satin beauty moth's caterpillars. Moving on from trees, the plant I'd like to highlight is what I believe to be pelletry of the wall. This small to medium-sized herb loves colonising the cracks in rocks, cliffs, pavements, and as the name suggests, walls. A relative of the stinging nettle, this plant is also hairy, though the fine hairs on the stems and leaf margins do not sting. The leaves are long, oval, and alternating, and the stem is purpley red in colour, and is sometimes sticky. It has small, white or pink flowers in clusters at the axils of the leaves. Why is it called pellitory? Okay, bear with me here. It appears to be derived from an old French word, which was derived from a Latin word, which itself was derived from a Greek word, which means fever. I don't have a dictionary of Old French, but I do have Latin and Ancient Greek dictionaries, and having checked, yes, the word in question does indeed mean fever. I believe that this may be because the renowned ancient Greek herbalist Dioscorides mentioned in his work De Materia Medica a herb called helixine, which matches the description of pellitory of the wall and is listed as useful against all forms of inflammation. And this assessment is repeated by English botanist Nicholas Culpeper in the 1600s. Pellitory of the wall was also traditionally used to treat stones, such as bladder and kidney stones, possibly due to the plant's apparent conquest of the stones it inhabits. The plant's use in medicine is believed to be a factor in why it is found so often around churches and monastic buildings, as during the Middle Ages, healthcare was frequently the domain of the church. While the herb was used in medicine for millennia, there's been very little modern scientific study into its efficacy. Some in vitro studies have demonstrated antimicrobial properties of pellitory extracts, notably against bacteria and fungal pathogens, so its traditional use in treating infections, or the fevers from which it was named, may have some effect. Its pollen is sadly a major trigger for asthma and other respiratory issues, and the plant is often considered a weed. But on the plus side, the leaves are food for the red admiral butterfly's caterpillar. Conclusion. Now that was a bit of an adventure. I did not expect to get so carried away talking about the different species I encountered, but I do hope you enjoyed learning about the wildlife I found in the churchyard. Of course, every churchyard is different, so who knows what you might find if you go looking. Naturally, I advise being respectful while you're there. It is a gravesite after all, and this is particularly important if it's still an active cemetery. I hope I've inspired you to get out into nature and see what you can find. It doesn't have to be something big and impressive, even tiny little weeds can tell a fascinating story. As always, I've left a library of links in the description if you want to learn more on any of these topics. So until next time, thank you for watching.